What's going on, guys? My name is Richard and welcome back to the stock market outlook video. As always, I'll talk through my trades and holdings over this past week. Then we'll cover the price action of the major indexes, the leading stocks in the market, and we'll also talk about how my previous watches performed over this past week. And we did have some nice moves. And we'll also talk about a few different sentiment indicators, the IBD big picture article, and then finally the GMI signal from wishingoutball.com. So at the end of the video, we'll put all those information sources together and I'll determine, in my view, what the current trend of the market is. And then based off that trend, you can kind of decide for yourself how aggressive or defensive you want to be in the market next week. And if you enjoy my analysis, please go ahead and leave a like down below on the video. It really does help me out and my channel. And also subscribe if you're looking forward to more videos just like this one every single week. So diving right in, let's start with my trades from this past week. And I didn't have too many trades this week because I was pretty much completely invested at the start. But we did have a big trade in Fastly, which I'll definitely get to in just a second. But starting things off, I did add to my position of Tesla, and let me show drawings right here. As it broke above this pivot on the 14th at about 449.50 was my buy here. And overall, I started my position down here as it broke through the low this day right here off the 50-day moving average bounce. So overall, this was a small add, and I am at this time down on my shares, but hopefully it can rebound and challenge these previous pivots and eventually the all-time highs at about 500. So that is Tesla, which is still coiling up really nicely. And next up, I actually did sell my SE at break even on this day right here, this Thursday, the 15th. And that's because I had moved up my stop because it increased 8% from my buy point, which was on this day right here as it took out these pivots right here. But SE in general is acting still pretty normal, and you had a nice recovery on that day. And I'll look to get back in this on the next setup on a green dot or teal dot, or as it takes out the highs of these days right here. So that's SE. And lastly, we've got Fastly, which was my biggest trade from this week. And overall, you can see a gap down on this day, way through my stop, which was at the low of this day right here, and right under the 50-day moving average. So overall, as a trader, I kind of operate in between my average gain and average loss. So I'm shooting personally for a 3 to 5% loss max, and then a 15 to 20% average gain. So Fastly, when it gapped down and moved through my stop, which was down here, I sold no questions asked, and I actually did take a loss on this trade. I started buying on this day right here, so I had about a 8 to 10% loss overall. And it really does hurt to go from a 30 to 35% gain all the way down to a 5% loss. But overall, this is just a small blip in my overall progress, and a few percentage points off my yearly performance aren't that big a deal. And overall, I believe in the system that I'm using. I believe in my entries and exits. And I think that that system overall will cause a lot more profits than just a few bad trades like this, where you can't really expect that this is going to happen. For this trade, there wasn't really an indication of technical weakness. You did have a move down on above average volume on this Wednesday, but nothing really out of the ordinary, especially because it had moved up so strongly on this previous Wednesday. It just really was consolidating and still drifting higher. So overall, besides the big gap down on volume previously, there wasn't really a sign that this could happen. And overall, I did obey my rules for this trade. You could have done a few things to mitigate this risk. You could have sold a little bit on the way up, which I'll be writing some rules to institute that as well. And the other thing is just to have your position sizing in a way that a drop like this, even though it's pretty bad, doesn't completely take out your performance. So overall, I just cut my losses and moved on and looked for new opportunities. So for me at this point, Fastly is a broken stock chart. You have this huge gap down on volume and a move through the 50-day moving average on above average volume, which is a clear sell signal. So until this really forms up and makes another base, I'll be focusing on other names. So overall, going through the charts that I still own, you had a nice move up on Zoom, breaking out of the high tight flag pivot at 529.74. And my entry point for some add-on shares was at the breakout above this pivot at 507.49. Neo also had a nice move. You had a gap up and go on this day right here, this Wednesday the 14th. And so far, I would expect this to consolidate a bit, probably drop down a bit, but I don't want to see it take out the low of this day right here. And I just want to give it time to let these moving averages catch up and hopefully continue the uptrend. Pinterest as well, you can see is still kind of forming this tight shelf, and you did kind of have an ugly bar here, but overall it's hanging in there, and if it can break out above this 45.84 level, that would indicate that it could be starting another leg up. CrowdStrike as well had some ugly bars late last week. You had a downside reversal on Wednesday, but overall you had support at the 21 EMA, and so far it's still kind of consolidating sideways. And if we go to a weekly chart, it looks fine, and hopefully it can finally break above the short-term pivot at 153 and continue the strong uptrend that it was in. Next up, we've got the QQQ, which we'll talk about in just a second. Beyond Meat is still consolidating nicely. SQ is consolidating, forming a little shelf here. Livongo is still moving sideways below the short-term pivot. And let's go to Tesla. We already talked about that. NXP is forming a shelf as well, although it did have a kind of ugly bar on this Friday. It wasn't on above average volume, but it was on higher volume than the previous days. So overall on this day, because it looks like it's forming a little shelf here, I did take off a few of my shares, about 20% on this day, and I'll look to add those back if it forms another entry like a green dot or teal dot. So that is kind of my rundown of my holdings. If you guys have any feedback or questions, just let me know down in the comment section below. And now let's move on to the potential true market leaders. So we already talked about Zoom, so let's move on to WKHS, which is pretty erratic at this point, but it is finding support at the 50-day moving average. Fiverr is continuing to trend higher very nicely, and you can see it's above all those key moving averages, the 10-day, the 21 EMA, and the 50-day moving average. Pins we already talked about. TTD is also trading higher, although it did pull back last week to the 10-day moving average, so hopefully it can consolidate here and then resume the overall uptrend. But you've got so many days up in a row that this really indicates institutional demand. Apps as well is trending above the key moving averages and looking very nice, making new highs pretty much every day. HDMP is pulling back to the 21 EMA and could present a buying opportunity early next week. Twilio is moving up strongly from this gap and go here and had a nice reversal bar on the 15th, really showing a lot of strength. EMPH as well is moving up nicely, trending above all the key moving averages, and broke out a little bit above the short-term shelf on Friday. AMD is finding support at the 50-day moving average and kind of looks like a cup and handle pattern, so I'll be looking for a break above this pivot at 88.72. CrowdStrike we already covered. SEDG, very similar to EMPH. Look for a breakout above the pivot at 314.00. Beyond Meat we already covered. DDOG is moving up nicely and once again had a nice reversal bar on this Thursday. Net looks very similar. Shop is forming another cup and handle, and this has been basing for quite a while, so this is one to keep an eye on. And NVIDIA as well is forming a little bit of a cup and handle pattern. SQ is forming a short shelf at all-time highs. TDOC and LVGO look a little bit erratic here, but they are kind of tightening up a little bit, but I do want to see a definitive move up above these all-time highs. DKNG is moving down to the 50-day moving average, and I don't like how it's on higher volume, but overall it is looking like it's finding a little bit of support here, so look for a bounce off this on above average volume early next week. Roku is moving up nicely, trending above the key moving averages, and had a bit of a pullback late last week. Etsy as well is moving up nicely and broke out into new all-time highs, and it's forming a tight shelf here and formed a nice reversal bar on the 15th, as we saw in many of these strong growth names. Tesla we already covered. SE we already talked about. Peloton is trending beautifully, although it did have a rare down day on this Friday. So this will base at some point, and I'll be looking to find a setup once it does. And finally, we've got XP, which we already covered, trending above all those key moving averages. So overall, that is my rundown of the true market leaders. If there's any stocks that you think I should add to this list, just let me know down below in the comment section. So now that we've talked about the true market leaders, let's move on to the overall indexes and start with the QQQ on a day-by-day time frame. So overall, on Monday, we had a strong gap up of 3.09% on above average volume, but then towards the rest of the week, you can see we kind of faded, had a nice reversal bar here, and tried to fill this gap, but overall, we were kind of trending down over the course of the week, and we had a weekly closing range of 18%, a daily closing range of 7% on this Friday. So overall, a nice day on Monday. Then we had a nice consolidation day on Tuesday, and then we were consolidating for much of this day, but we did kind of take out the lows of the previous day, which could indicate a further move down. And then we had a big gap down on this Thursday, and we almost filled this gap. If we go to the low here, it was 286.54, and the high of this day was 282.71. So we still have this little kind of baby gap that isn't filled just yet. And then on Friday, you can see we gapped up, but it didn't hold, and we had a pretty weak close towards the end of the day with the QQQ moving down along with the majority of the other growth stocks. So overall, from this last bar, the expectation is we go sideways or lower. And moving over to a weekly chart, the expectation from this bar here is we go sideways or higher. And you can see we are in a clear stage 2 uptrend with price trending above the 10-week and 30-week moving averages. So moving on to the S&P 500, the SPY. Overall, we are up 0.13% on the week with a weekly closing range of 38.2% and only a 5.2% daily closing range on this past Friday. So the expectation from this weekly bar is we go sideways or higher. And we are in a stage 2 uptrend on the SPY as well, with price trending above the 10-week and 30-week moving averages, which are both moving up. So next up, we've got the IWM, the Russell 2000, and we did have a nice reversal bar here, although we were down 0.22% on the week, and the weekly closing range was 65.2%, and the daily closing range on Friday was 2.9%. So overall, the expectation from this bar is we go sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. Next up, we've got the Dow Jones, the DIA, and overall we were up on the week 0.01% with a weekly closing range of 54.2% and a daily closing range on Friday of 3.2%. And overall, we are in a stage 2 uptrend on the Dow Jones as well. And next up, we've got the FFTY, the IBD 50 ETF, and overall we are up 0.2% with a weekly closing range of 43.9% and a daily closing range of 0% on this past Friday. And from this weekly bar, the expectation is we go sideways or higher, and we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And next up, we've got the XLF, the financials, and overall we are down 0.95% with a weekly closing range of 44.4% and a daily closing range of 42.9% on this past Friday. And at this point, we are in a kind of stage 1 at this point because the 10-week is flat, although the 30-week is trending up. Next up, we've got GLD or gold, and overall we were down 1.54% with a weekly closing range of 32.2% and a daily closing range on Friday of 14.3%. At this point, we are in a stage 1 because we are above an uptrending 30-week, but we are below that key 10-week moving average, which is trending down. And lastly, looking at the VIX, the volatility index, you can see we did have an uptick in volatility last week. It was up 9.64% with a weekly closing range of 66.5% and a daily closing range on Friday of 96.1%. So as you can see from the daily closing ranges on the VIX and the main indexes, we did see some weakness late last week. So that is kind of a run through of the major indexes. And now let's move on to my weekly watch list. And overall, if we sort by weekly change on my universe list, the top performers were NEO and NETS. LAZY, Lazy as well, had a nice breakout. Data moved up as well through the IPO base here, and JKS kept on trending higher. But if we focus on my focus list and sort by weekly change, Zoom was a top performer, up 11.5% on the week. FTHM as well had a nice breakout on above average volume, but then pulled back to the pivots and found support there late on Friday. SITM as well broke out of the short-term consolidation. RH tried to break out on this day right here, but faded late in the week. And FSLR was our only other green trade, and this as well broke out above this pair right here, found support on Thursday, and broke out once again on Friday. And let's move back to this main chart right here, just so we have those key moving averages. So overall, only 5 out of the 13 stocks on my radar were green late last week, which kind of suggests that the overall market was a little bit weaker, especially later in the week. And now let's talk about the biggest losers. So overall, we've got Run, which was pulling back to the 50-day moving average and maybe found support here on Thursday, but I wouldn't be surprised if this moves back down to the 50-day. OTRK as well, you can see has sliced through the 50-day moving average, so that's not a good sign. You want to see this move up and find support there. NVIDIA as well is still consolidating and looks pretty good. Pins is forming a tight shelf here, and if we go to crowd and go back to a daily, we already covered this, but overall it's finding support at the 21 EMA. Tesla is still coiling. GoGo had a nice move on Friday, and overall, keep an eye on this for a breakout above this downward trend line early next week. And Livongo, we already covered, is still consolidating below this pivot. So overall, not the strongest performance from my watch list, but make sure you guys tune in later today for my next one. So that is the stocks I want to cover, and now let's move on to sentiment. So overall, we did see a drop in bullish sentiment late last week. You can see we were only 48.9% bullish on this Friday survey, which is a drop from the previous entry at 61.5%. And next up, we've got the hedge fund exposure index, which is now above 100. So that is a reason to be a little bit more cautious. And we've also got a move up on the bulls versus bears poll. And lastly, we've got the put call ratio, which is 0.63 as of 10/16. So overall, in terms of sentiment, we did see a drop in terms of my sentiment surveys, but you saw increased bullishness in terms of the other three indicators. So moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, the headline reads, "Stocks close on a whimper, but these stocks seem ready to climb." And overall, reading through, they talk about the poor close on Friday and how this is actually a stalling day on the S&P 500. And you've also got a few different stocks that they mentioned here where they talk about how the Dow Jones actually held up pretty well on Friday. And overall, they talk about some mixed signals, although we did have a fall through day finally on the NASDAQ. And you also have the IBD 50 packed with bases, so that could be a good list to look through and try to find new ideas. And overall, that's pretty much it. And their take is that the current outlook is still a confirmed uptrend. We now have 2 distribution days on the S&P 500. So moving on to the GMI signal, you can see it's green since October 6th, and we also have a GMI score of 5 out of 6, which is pretty strong. So overall, my current view is we are still in a confirmed uptrend, and I'll be looking to add stocks to my portfolio if they present good low-risk entries. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and leave a like down below, and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys in future videos.